What the Rickroll in 2021? Jesus Christ, when will these memers get a better joke? I mean, I would have been happy with getting coconut mold, or even being gnomed, but being rickrolled in 2021, that's f***ing ridiculous! Who the f*** likes Rick? Oh! Where the f*** am I?
Here at DrLockdown Reviews, we value all our employees. Well, employee, which is why we're providing Vaughn Vanderbar with a 1 month no expenses paid trip to the northeast point of Queensland. We regret that he won't be able to participate in today's episode, but the episode must go on regardless. On we go! In the past 2 years of running this channel, I've been very critical of one line in particular: War for Cybertron, Earthrise. Some might think I've been too critical, but in actuality, it's a little more complicated than that. I've certainly praised its high points, like Optimus Prime and Skylinks, and the line has had some truly wonderful designs that I haven't covered yet. But ultimately, out of the multitude of figures that were released, the vast majority were compromised in some sense. And to clarify, it's not the G1 aesthetic I take issue with. There are plenty of toys, especially this year, that take that aesthetic and do amazing things with it. But it's clear that there were issues behind the scenes, not from articles, not from insider information, but just from examining the quality of the figures themselves. However, let's be real here, I can only milk this dead horse so much. At some point, you've just gotta move on. Sure, pretty much every lackluster Earthrise release is worthy of a script in its own right, and I could really make interesting videos out of them. But enough is enough, and to a certain extent this is getting tiresome. So indulge me, as we finally put this prolonged tirade to rest. I've been holding this one in for a very long time, and I'm really excited to let loose at last. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm Dr. Lockdown, and today's special diagnosis pertains to Earthrise WFC-E7 Deluxe Class Cliffjumper. Cliffjumper is an odd case. If one were to list all of his positives and negatives, he'd seem like a perfect deluxe, save for a few caveats. His presentation and feel are incredibly deceptive, as you'll come to realize in a moment, provided you aren't aware of his debacle already. Case in point, in vehicle mode, this guy looks practically perfect, or at least as perfect as his size class allows him to. Given that Cliffjumper was released pre-Studio Series 86 Jazz, the idea of simply not giving a f*** about copyright hadn't been invented yet. As such, he does not turn into a Porsche, but rather an amalgamation of various other unlicensed cars. Essentially, he's the flip side of Power of the Prime's Jazz, where all the aesthetics actually blend together seamlessly instead of clashing with each other every 3 centimeters. The detail is truly phenomenal. No part of this vehicle mode looks boring in any way. The widened grille at the front provides tons of visual interest, and I adore the hidden top lights molded in. Hell, they've even painted the front lights silver. How often does Hasbro do that, for f***'s sake? The tires are gorgeous as well, with fantastic silver hubcaps. There are also molded brakes back there if you're into that sort of thing. Personally, I don't care either way since I'm not a car expert, but I appreciate the effort, and I recognize that as an indicator of the passion the designer put into this. The top of the car also looks brilliant, with elevated vents, lovely aqua windows, and whatever this thing is. Sorry mate, I'm not the lazy eyebrow reviewer. I just like the way it looks, realism or no. Actually, that's not fair. The realism they put into this is probably why it looks so good. You don't have to be an expert to appreciate it. As you move back, the detail does ease off a little bit, save for molded doors and insane bumper detail. But this is where the red paint kicks in. Cliffjumper sits right in the middle of the first wave red Autobot Deluxe trilogy, using the radical as f*** matte red finish on pretty much every vehicle surface. Much like Sideswipe before him and Warpath after him, this paint is as durable as it is beautiful. Unless you're throwing it at a wall or some shit, there's no way this is chipping. Really puts into perspective how much of a fumble Starscream was. The finish really makes this thing look like a top-of-the-line collectible, which is astonishing for a $35 retail figure. It ends up looking far more premium than some actual masterpiece figures. Seriously, I'd love to see more figures done in this style. I realize that matte finishes can be a little hard to get right, but if they can capture this type of lightning in a bottle for other colors, we might have some of the best painted retail action figures on the market. And sure, there are some parts missing paint due to the budget, but the fact that they're molded in goes a long way. And yes, the back window doesn't make any effort to color match, given that they're reusing the same shade as the bumper, but f*** it looks cool as hell anyway. Yes, it may have been better to mold in venter detail like something along the lines of Wheeljack, but then that may have caused designs to blend together, or maybe even cause confusion with Windcharger. Either way, it looks fine, don't sue me Scott the Woz, and the rest of the vehicle mode looks truly divine. Legitimately, this might be one of the best executed vehicles in all of Earthrise. It's not my favorite vehicle by any means, but in terms of objectivity, I can't really think of anything else that's this high quality. Not even the redecos demos and retools that followed it. And if that's not enough, the weapon integration is beyond masterful. So, you remember that one scene in Generation 1 where he pulls a motherfucking chitty chitty bang bang? Well, much like the siege weapons before him, his big f***off bazooka separates into multiple pieces. Unlike those examples, though, these actually combine with the car to form all manner of aquatic additions. See, these are the kinds of G1 throwbacks I like, not the cases where they use the designs as a crutch for lazy engineering and lackluster sculpts, but when they cut deep and find the essence of the character, as well as the show itself. Generation 1 is immature, dumb fun, and this right here encapsulates it perfectly. I want to see more of this going forward, provided the budget allows such. And, maybe this budget didn't, but we'll get to that later. So, you may ask, what's the trade-off for all this? What do they have to sacrifice in order to bring this awesomeness to plastic form? Well, aside from the souls of at least 5 animated designers. Well, aside from
another thing.
The size is the thing that's hit the most. This thing is tiny, not quite Legends tiny, but definitely Revenge of the Fallen Scout class tiny. Now, to me, this and all of these doesn't seem like a bad price at all, especially given the budget chucks into the paint. However, many people still don't quite see it that way. This whole smaller than the price point implies thing continues to be a hot topic to this day, and sadly there's not much I can do to convince people at this point. I already went through my realization with Siege Astro Train, but anyone still shitting on these Legends Deluxes, as they call them, is probably stuck in their ways. I'd say give it a shot if that's the only thing pissing you off with this release, but if the idea still makes you want to punch a wall, then sorry mates, nothing I can do for you. Ah well, personally I think the size works fine. There's enough here to justify the price tag, at least in vehicle mode. Plus Studio Series has been doing this for years anyway, and even then I've been paying much more for third-party Legends for God knows how long. It's fine, get over it. Honestly, as far as the vehicle mode is concerned, I have not a single complaint. I could ask for extra painted details here and there, but for the price point, here's perfect. Nothing wrong in this mode. Here's an absolutely divine vehicle mode. If you're buying him for this mode, then you're in for an absolute treat. He's exquisite, stupendous, and No, it's finally time to talk about. No, I can't. My head. My head. I think I've been holding this one in for way too long. My head. My soul. The partsforming. No. Please, no.
Oh, you can...
I have been holding in to that for far too long. I needed that shit. So, let's get into this. There are many ways in which a figure can disappoint, regardless of whether it leads to the release actually being bad or not. Sometimes a figure has several minor nitpicks that lead to it being an ultimately lackluster package. Sometimes there's nothing of quality, so it ends up infuriating you at every turn. Occasionally the design fumbles around in certain ways where you can tell they tried, but it doesn't quite hit the mark. Maybe the aesthetic is horrid in some sense, so it doesn't matter how good the engineering is. It just ends up being a bad decision made in the design process. Cliffjumper is a unique case. Well, not quite unique in the sense that he parts forms, but unique in how it turns out. Backing up a bit, to facilitate his transformation, the entire back third of the vehicle mode must be removed. This right here is a textbook case of parts forming, with no way of arguing it can be avoided. The way it clips on cannot be left in place during the transformation. The entire identity of this figure is based around this one key idea. This right here is Cliffjumper's Achilles heel, or rather his Achilles vor, because it engulfs the entire package and ruins everything, making you feel super uncomfortable and forever a changed man. Yes, that was a creepy analogy, but this figure pisses me off to no end, so my writing style is all over the place. Now, contrary to popular belief, I don't outright hate parts forming, if it's used in unique and interesting ways. Parts forming that becomes a weapon? Sure, that's pretty neat. Headmasters and Power Masters? Well, technically the robot is actually just this tiny thing, if you go by the Japanese continuity, so I suppose it's fine. Combiner parts forming? It's fine as long as the core bots move between modes without any. And even then, if the figure takes its parts forming ideas and embraces them fully, making them a core part of their character, fun can be had. Granted, this has had mixed results. For every brunt, there's sadly a 6-gun. But hey, it can work. Hell, even if it becomes a shield, I can typically begrudgingly move on. And sure, some people might tell you this is a shield, but jumping ahead a bit for a sec, no, this isn't a shield. This is a random chunk in the vehicle mode that they desperately tried to justify. There's nothing clever or interesting about this use. It's the designers pulling the easy way out. And before you tell me there's an upgrade kit that makes it transform without parts forming, here's a neat tidbit: it doesn't actually work. In theory, it's a cool little addition, but unfortunately there's one major problem: 3D printed plastic. This shit is not designed to hold up under multiple transformations. I owned it, and I don't anymore because it fell to pieces. Not that you'd want to buy it anyway, since the only place you can get it is from goddamn TF Safari, known for stealing independent designers' work, telling them to off when they ask for them to stop, and frequently abusing shipping policies to pocket extra cash. Sorry to go off topic, but I'm sick and tired of people using this website when they actively scammed myself and many other members of the community. People need to wise up and stop using the website. Either way, though, I'm sure someone can design a method to fix the parts forming, but I don't think anyone will because very few people actually care. People either put up with it or don't buy the figure at all. Either way, I can't see this as anything other than a giant insult to everything Transformers stands for. This franchise, ever since Generation 2 at least, has stood on the ideology of all-inclusive transformation. Whilst other franchises continue to cheat with parts-forming pieces, Transformers has always had the highest level of engineering, so it was never required. Cliffjumper spits in the face of all that, along with Arse and even Warpath to a certain extent, as much as I like him. And at this point, I think I should mention that this doesn't just end the segment on parts forming. Yes, it's one aspect of the figure, and there are others, but it's a pretty big aspects. I know people will try to tell me, oh, just ignore it, it's fine. But that's like telling someone who hates motion controls to just ignore that aspect on the original release of Twilight Princess. You're just gonna ignore the entire intent of the design? You can't just do that. For those who don't want me to complain at length about this issue, you might as well click off right now because I ain't jumping off this train for a long ride yet. I've been holding this in for a long time, and now thanks to a certain someone being out of the way, I can finally cut loose. I do wonder how he's doing though.
So how long is this ride gonna take?
Well, considering we're going interstate, about 8 hours.
Ugh, Jesus Crips. Oh, by the way, have you heard of today's sponsor, RoboToys? RoboToys is an online toy retailer specializing in all sorts of action figures, especially Transformers.
I don't care.
If you're looking for mainline Generation Selects, Masterpiece, knockoffs, or third party, they've got your
I
back.
could not care less.
Don't forget to use the code DrLockdown 10% off for 10% off at the checkout for a single-use 10% off coupon.
You know I can blacklist you on the app, right?
And you know people can still buy other shit off the store, you know, aside from Cliffjumper,
I do
right?
not care.
And I barely know how this app works to begin with, so humor me for a bit.
Shut up!
Oh, would you rather I shield wreck on here?
It's a real shame that this figure got bogged down by the parts forming, because everything else in this transformation actually works really well. It takes a few cues from the Masterpiece version, but adds in a plethora of twists and turns. It ultimately ends up being an incredibly fun experience. Said experience, however, ends up being completely soured by the inclusion of the parts forming. See, this right here is an interesting case, because unlike a lot of instances, the parts forming isn't a compromise. As seen with the failure of the upgrade parts, it can't just be upgraded away. It's baked into the very identity of this Transformer. The parts forming is the point of the design. The designer from the get-go wanted to include it in the conversion. As such, this isn't a release marred by laziness, it's one marred by misguiding. And sure, the robot mode is pretty neat. It's far from the best bot of the line, let alone the trilogy, but it does get a lot right. The feet would have to be the best part, incorporating the kibble perfectly. Granted, the design work was practically done for them thanks to the previous endeavor with the Brother Masterpiece, but thanks to the flat nature of the vehicle mode and the really well executed paints, these turned out quite nicely. The torso is also pretty neat. I do kinda wish they put the Autobot symbol here, but something toy accuracy or whatever, so I get it. I'm slightly annoyed, but I do get it. And hey, there's always repro labels if you really want to fix it. The articulation is also pretty neat. Sure, it's what we've come to expect from the line, but the sculpt work really helps accentuate it, and it ends up looking much more lively than it actually is. In essence, it's the opposite of Studio Series 86 Jazz. This shows the importance of silhouette and sculpt work in the execution of articulation, although it is weird how many references to that Jazz feel they're going through. Oh well. In terms of robot mode complaints, the only thing I can really think of is the waist joint, which doesn't really click into place that well. There should have been a tab here, so it's a bit of an oversight. And yes, some people have complained about the size. In some respects, they are right. He is ridiculously small, about Primor's trilogy Legend small. However, the engineering more than makes up for it, and considering how many weapons he's loaded with, I think he justifies the price point. We really need to get over this too small mentality. Some of the best figures we've gotten recently have lived by this price point over price tag mantra. But other than that, it's a pretty good robot mode, if examined in a vacuum. But we can't examine this in a vacuum, and this isn't a robot-enhanced design figure. This is a Transformer, and ultimately when you consider the sacrifices made made to get here, it ultimately isn't worth it. It's not like the figure has the perfect robot mode facilitated by the parts forming, or that it uses the parts forming in a weird or unique way. The transformation is pretty damn good, but they could have easily engineered an equal transformation without parts forming. Not by modifying the design, of course, but by going back to the drawing boards and, actually designing things properly. And don't tell me it's impossible. We've seen, as I've covered in a previous review, that Iron Factory found it perfectly possible to cram a brilliant transformation into an even smaller package for only $5 more. Usually it's unfair to compare official to unlicensed Transformers, given they don't rely on the same price ranges, and get a lot more leeway. However, in this instance, given the similar size thresholds and the very similar prices, it's reasonable to assume Hashtag could have done something pretty similar at the same price point. The only difference is that Mini One Man Army has a bigger backpack, which, come on, it's not that big a deal. Anyway, back on topic. As briefly mentioned earlier, the parts forming piece tries and fails miserably to act as a shield. Although I guess when paired up with the bazooka, it looks... still looks f***ing dog shit. But that begs the question, if it's not to facilitate a weapon or an interesting play pattern or a combination gimmick or even a character that's physically impossible to do otherwise, why in the f*** would they do this? Why would they purposefully design this figure from the ground up to include this parts forming? To be honest, we will never know the reason why. We can't go up to the designer and tell them to spill the beans. As far as we're concerned, it's for Hashtag's eyes and ears only. It will forever be a mystery. However, that doesn't mean we can't speculate. There are two ways in which Hasbro calculates how to approach their toy lines. The first is, of course, through raw sales data. Which characters are selling? Which engineering types do fans respond well to? The Transformers primary issue sold out instantly? Great! Put updates in next year's Legacy line. That's not hyperbole, by the way. Apparently it's been leaked. Galaxy Upgrade Prime and Generation Select's Hotshot are shell forming like shit. Well, put Unicron Trilogy shit on the back burner. Of course, in the modern age, this sort of thing can only go so far. You cannot determine everything from sales data alone. Take the aforementioned Galaxy Upgrade Prime, for instance. With raw sales data, people may think that the character isn't liked, but with careful examination of the fandom through social media, one would easily be able to deduce that fans weren't satisfied with a bare-bones retool that actively clashed with the original aesthetic of the Siege Magnus molds. Unlike G1ers. As well as the fact that younger fans typically dislike the exclusivity situation surrounding many releases. I don't agree with that assumption, but it's something you can see quite clearly from a few minutes on social media. This is why Hasbro, and yes, Hasbro specifically, not Takara, actively crawl through social media to gauge fandom interest. And whilst my overall deduction is primarily a hypothesis without clear evidence, this part in particular is fact. They have mentioned multiple times in Fan First Fridays that they keep their finger on the pulse, pun not intended, even going out of their way to acknowledge leak and factory sample cultures. Now, keeping this in mind, what do Transformers fans love to do? They love to complain. Now, I like to think I keep a nice balance between positivity and negativity, but your average fan on the internet, as much as I hate to admit it, loves to complain about every nook and cranny. Toy budgets, licensing issues, release lineups, fandom interest, and none of these matter because to the average internet dweller, Hasbro is f***ing up royally and needs to be told such. The average positive fan is more likely to be silent, whereas the average negative fan is more likely to voice their opinions. It's something you can see with all fandoms. This isn't a new concept. So, taking that into account, fans complain about the simplicity and hollowness of designs. Okay, Siege comes around. We've now got smaller but more complex figures with less hollowness. Then people complain in the Studio Series line that figures are too small. Okay, smaller figures that fit into larger price tags get higher accessory counts. Then people complain about the lack of toon accuracy. Okay, there's a shift to cartoon-centric designs, for better or for worse. Then fans get ridiculous. They complain about back kibble. Kibble, for the most part, has always been a part of Transformers. It's always been there, chilling in the background, not really causing any trouble for most people. But for some reason, people seem to get absolutely livid over its conclusion, especially in the Studio Series line. Back kibble is seen as a capital offense. How dare a figure with a design as complex as this resort to keeping some of its alt mode on its back? It's an outrage! You'll ask any of these people and they'll go all melodramatic with speeches of
Back kibble is indicative of a disease, rotten flesh hanging off the plastic toy I bought for $30.
So with all that said, and with all the other restrictions being placed on the design, something has to give. These toys don't have an infinite budget. I know the somewhat pessimistic, not in the budget consume product sarcastic mentality is quite prevalent, especially around my age group. And I'm happy to call out Hasbro when they f*** up royally, but there has to be a point where you just shut up and accept these toys have limits. You need to complain where it counts and let some things, such as backpack kibble, go. But these people don't. They continue, and finally, it snaps. Compromises are made. Parts forming is that compromise. The ideology of this figure is all wrong, and it's not done in an amateurish way or anything of the sort. This figure was designed by Shogo Hasui, a truly legendary fellow who practically put Masterpiece on the map in its golden age. With the shift towards hypertune accuracy, these days he finds himself working way more on regular chug releases. His prestigious resume is one to behold, and the figures he touches are usually a safe bet. Except this one. This is what happens when complaints get taken way too much to heart. This is what happens when people are allowed to make decisions about figures that they have no idea how to design. For all my complaints about the community, Hasbro has just as much of a hand in this. They were the ones who took such complaints to heart. They were the ones who allowed such sacrifices to be made. And this wasn't just a one-off either. This sort of parts forming has had long-reaching effects in the line. It's only recently, after the backlash here, that they've started winding down their efforts. And you know what? Good. I don't want to see parts forming on my Transformers. One of the many reasons I'm drawn to collecting is because of their high level of quality. Every other transforming mech line on the market resorts to some level of parts forming, because in their mind, that's just how it's done, but Transformers, whether official or unofficial, never takes the easy way out. The ingenuity is what makes me stick around, amongst other things. Cliffjumper and those who incorporated parts forming after him spit in the face of everything this franchise stands for. He's a figure that puts token accuracy above the actual conversion experience. And for that, I can't forgive the flaws. And that is why I feel that Cliffjumper is the perfect poster child for War for Cybertron Earthrise. He may not be the worst, but every figure in that line has had issues pertaining to placing accuracy before engineering, compromising the enjoyment because some f***wits complained about inconsequential bullshit on the internet. And Cliffjumper, more than any other figure, embodies this trait wholeheartedly. With only a few exceptions, every single figure in this line was compromised to some extent. Last year, I used to call it Earthrise laziness, but I think Firebite27, who I have collaborated with in the past, put it best. Earthrise cynicism. The shift in focus led to many, many disappointing releases, and it would be far too difficult to list them all. But considering this is the grand finale, and this is the last chance I'll ever get to complain about them, f*** it! We're gonna do it anyway! Number 1, Sound Barrier. Why does this even exist? Number 3, Micromaster Hot Rod Patrol. Clunky as f*** backpacks, possibly the clunkiest of the whole Micromaster lineup. Number 4, Micromaster Military Patrol. The leftover retool parts cause way more problems than they're worth. Number 5, Hoist. I've already covered this f***er extensively. He's shit. Number 7, Cliffjumper. We're already shitting on him. Number 8, Ironworks. Actually quite good, but why the f*** didn't they bother to make new molds for the others? Number 9, Starscream. Also already covered him. What a disappointing Seeker mold, and the retools following him are somehow worse. Number 10, Grapple. Lovely design, but no f***ing paint, and you like peg breakages? Number 13, Slitherfang. Alright, but making these in clear plastic was a horrible idea. Number 16, Micromaster Astro Squad. How do we go from this to this in a year? I was so excited for future combination, but the lineup just fizzled out and fumbled with super disappointing robot modes. Legitimately, the Generation 1 versions look better in robot mode. Number 17, RC. This figure deserves to die. Number 18, Airwave. Also pretty good, but again, we needed new molds for the others. Number 19, Alicon. Probably the most boring deluxe I've ever come across. I sold this faster than I could say Mars Toys. Number 20, Smokescreen. I legitimately love this mold, especially this color scheme, but these knees can take a hike. Also, Barricader's horrible paint chipping. Fuck. Number 21, Snapdragon. Basically ape face, but boring. Number 22, Quintus on Judge. This isn't even a Transformer. Who asked for this? Number 23, Double Dealer. Already covered this one. So glad Fans Hobby just announced a repaint. Number 25, Scorponok. Probably the best Titan class figure we've ever gotten, but why the hollowness? This is a $350 toy. This shouldn't be a thing. At this point, the numbering all goes weird, so I'm ditching the numerical order. Double Crosser, same as Sound Barrier. Waste of a gimmick. Runamuck. Why the f*** did they use this chalky paint that chips horribly? Also, the transformation is super clunky. Runabout is better, but come on, the window is right there. It's not that hard. Iron Factory made perfectly good ones out of Sunstreaker, for God's sake. Megatron. Way to make the Siege version somehow terrible. Yeah, the G2 version is a little better, but if this is the best you can do, maybe don't release anything at all. Ironhide and Ratchet. Wow, somehow you took some of the best Siege molds and made them into some of the worst Earthrise ones. How is that even possible? Oh right, forcing alien alt modes into Earth ones. Clone reissues. These did not need reissues. They were awful then and they're awful now. Centurion, horrible QC, and this plastic mimicking silver doesn't do its job at all. For the price tag, they should have done better. Hell, the whole set should have been done better. I didn't get the weapons, but apparently they were Punch Counter Punch. What a downgrade from the original color scheme. Big yikes. You see what I mean? Even ignoring the ones that are absolutely terrible, there are so many releases that can't be called good without a quotation marked but following it. This line was not good. Sure, it was nostalgic to many people who grew up with the G1 cartoon, and even myself myself to an extent, given that I did grow up with G1 alongside Movieverse, alongside the Unicron trilogy, alongside Animated. But from an actual quality standpoint, there were so many issues that plagued it. And don't blame it on COVID. Sure, it probably contributed to the exclusivity kerfuffles, but a lot of these figures were designed pre-pandemic, so you can't really chalk it up to that. Ultimately, I don't think this is the worst line Hasbro has done in the past decade, because Fall of Cybertron exists. And even then, Earthrise wasn't nearly as bad as Power of the Primes, because that line took all of the Earthrise issues and combined it with baffling and or boring design choices. But it had a whole lot of issues. For people like myself who collect more for the engineering aspect than the character aspect, it was a rough year for Generations. Except Studio Series, which actually reached a high point, but that's another story for another time. Still, that doesn't exactly help with how this figure should be graded. See, if it were flat out bad, that would be one thing, and I could give it a score instantly. But there are so many awe-inspiring elements on show, only to be held back by one big slap in the face. I can see the love that Shogo Hasui put into this thing, but I can also see the cynicism in it. It cannot be denied. The reason I hate this figure is not because it's truly awful, but because of the frustration relating to the dichotomy of amazing and awful elements. Hell, it's the only figure in my collection that I hate with a passion, but I still bought repro labels for. I have a rule where I don't buy repro labels for figures I dislike, like Empty Star Saber for instance, but I broke my rule just for this guy. So it's really confusing. At one point I even f***ed around with the idea of not giving it a score at all. But honestly, I don't think that would be fair. So ultimately, I think I'll have to settle for a 2 out of 5. I still don't feel fully satisfied with that ranking, but in the end, I kinda accept that that's the most accurate. It makes me as angry as a 1 out of 5 figure, but it's got elements of a 5 out of 5 figure all jumbled into one. So that's the best, or the worst, I can give it. Maybe you'll find some enjoyment in this figure, but for me, I'm getting nothing. I'm not selling it anytime soon because of said amazing elements, especially that vehicle mode. It's truly awe-inspiring. But as I've said many times in this video, it's a slap in the face, even after getting all of this off my chest. So all I can say to finish off this review is, going forward, temper your criticism. You don't always have to scrutinize every single aspect of a toy. Budgets are a thing, sacrifices do have to be made. If you fight every battle, you'll end up losing the war. And Earthrise Cliffjumper is the consequence of...
Oh, so you think you can just shit me up north just so you can shit on a deluxe? That's one of the best we've had in a decade!
Vaughn. It's okay. I'm done now. It's out of my system. I don't need to shit on...
Out of your system, my arse, as if you're not just gonna keep complaining and complaining, as if G1 accuracy isn't the end goal of all Transformers.
Please don't put words in my mouth.
Fine, I'll put pain in your gizzard.
What?
Eat my feet off! Eat my feet! My feet off! Eat my feet! My feet off! Eat my feet off! Eat my feet!
Taking my posters and half my collection. Vaughn, please. Vaughn!
Vaughn!
Vaughn! No, Vaughn!